Okay, so again, the theme is what happens in the autumn in the new Arctic when there's less ice and the ice is very slow to return. So there's this picture of storm surge and flooding in Barrow, and that's the kind of thing we're interested in. So to set the stage for this, here's some work that we've done in the last few years looking at the ice trends. And I know we hear a lot and we talk a lot about how much less ice there is in the aerial extent or the volume of ice. But one of the things I think is really interesting and a lot of people are studying now is the timing. And of course, you see it here and you see how late the ice is to return. So this is a map looking down. Here we are in Nome, there's the North Slope. And we're looking down at a heat map. The color is telling us how much later ice is appearing in the autumn. How late is the ice to return? And there's a trend that's about 1 day per year later. So over the course of 3 decades, that's about a month. This is something that we published a few years ago when we thought, yeah, the freeze up's about a month later. Well, things appear to have accelerated a fair bit, and now the freeze up in some cases this year, it feels like it's going to be almost 2 months later, depending on how you count it. So it's a lot later. And what we see coupled with that is that means there's open water for a lot longer in the fall, right? Well, the fall is also when we have more storm activity, we have more wind. And so the combined effect of having all this area open when the big storms come in is that there's more wave action, there's more wave activity. And so that open water space, we call that the fetch. That's the space over which waves can grow when there's wind. And if there's more fetch for the same amount of wind, there's more waves. And so this is something we've been able to study and with a lot of data that we've collected out in the central Beaufort and the Chukchi. And we see these kind of relationships between the amount of wave energy that's on the vertical axis and the fetch that's on the horizontal axis. They're very well correlated. If there's more fetch, if there's more open water, there's a higher sea state. They're bigger waves, more wave action. And so that's from data at one position, one point where we had a mooring for several years. But we can also look at the regional trends using a model, using a computer model that simulates the waves over the whole region. And that's what this result is. And we see something that's similar. We see spanning over 30 years, that's the horizontal axis. We see that the wave heights in the top panel are in general increasing. Now, there's a lot of up and down in there. Every year is a little bit different and every storm's a little bit different. So I'm making big averages here over the entire season and the entire year to get those numbers. But in general, there's this increase. There's also an increase in the wave period. And that we find interesting because that means the waves are turning more into a swell-like wave. And those swell waves, they actually carry even more energy and they may have more erosive power at a coastline because they're longer period. So both the height and the period are important signals. But the winds, there's not much of a trend there, right? So it's not particularly getting windier or stormier, at least in this analysis. It's that there's just more open water, there's more fetch. So the question that we're really after is, what are the effects of an increasing Arctic sea state? And especially, what are the effects at the coast? Well, one thing that we're seeing a lot, and I imagine you're seeing around here, is that we're seeing a lot more pancake ice. So pancake ice is an ice formation type, that a process of ice formation that requires wave motion to slosh around the frazzle and have the frazzle flock together and then eventually bump into all of the neighbors and make these round-ish patterns. And we see this a lot. We saw this in Sikuliaq in 2015. We saw a lot of this. And so I just include this video if those of you who have not seen pancake ice, probably most of you have, but this is pretty far up in the Beaufort and the waves coming through are about 3 or 4 meters. And you can see as they come through, the pancakes all clump together in the top of the wave and then they spread apart in the trough. And that pattern continues. And that's how the pancakes are formed. And so one thing we're interested in is what type of ice is going to form in the Arctic now. And we think there'll be more pancake ice because there's more waves. And so there's lots of implications seasonally then for building ice in that way rather than in the more flat nihilist sheets of ice that used to be more common. Now I'm going to take this to the coast. And one of the things we know about the coast, especially along the Arctic slope, but even down here it's mostly true, is that in general there is recession at the coastline. The coastline is moving backwards. It is eroding. So this is a study that was done a few years ago. And the colors here along the North Slope are the rate of shoreline retreat in meters per year. The most extreme areas like Drew Point and Cape Hauke, they are something like 10 meters per year that the shoreline is marching back towards the land. Really, really extreme amounts. Now, most of those cases are actually permafrost that is having this bluff collapse. Maybe you've seen, there's pretty spectacular pictures of this. time-lapse photography showing this. It's really some wonderful results that other colleagues have been doing and working on with that process. Along the rest of the coastline, maybe it's more like 1 or 2 meters per year. And that's where we think it's more similar to other coastlines around the world where there's sand and gravel and that's being reworked by this mechanical action of the waves. And that's really what we're focused on in this project, although we'd like to keep track of the temperatures such that we can contribute to that permafrost bluff collapse question also. So we know things are eroding and we're trying to figure out what are the oceanographic conditions that are forcing this? What are the waves, the temperatures, et cetera. So yeah, there's this real theme here for us in determining what is thermodynamic, when is the permafrost coast melting because the water's warmer, and that's a clear signal, that's definitely happening. And when is there mechanical erosion because there's increased wave activity? And the answer in most places is both, but what are the relative magnitudes of those, and can we put it all together so that we have prediction going forward? Well, to have prediction, you need a model. And that's where the work of Nirni Kumar come in and Lucia Hoskova, who are both working on this project together. We are building a model that can do all of these things together, that can do the waves and the winds, can do the sea ice, can do the circulation, what the currents are doing, and keep track of all of this so that we have some predictive skill. All right? So here's an example of what that model looks like. It's still very much in development, and part of the work we're doing now on this trip is to get more data to verify that model, to validate that model, and to tune it where we need to and figure out where to improve it. But here's one example. This is from 2014, where we have some data from another project. And 2014 was an interesting summer because there was some remnant ice along the North Slope. So here is Utqiagvik, here's Point Barrow, Prudhoe Bay is over here, and so here's the whole North Slope. And then the color scale is the ice in August of 2014. And there's this remnant bit of ice here that's along the coast. And that was around through until about September 1st, and then eventually melted away that season. And so this is a great example to ask the question, how much does this ice protect the coast? There's all this open water, all this blue here. That's a big fetch. And if a storm comes through, you can make a lot of waves in a fetch like that. But can those waves get to the coast if that ice is present? And the answer is probably not, but how much? We want to be quantitative about these things. So here's an example result from that. This is all Lucia's work, where this is the wind field. The wind's pretty uniform over this entire domain. It's about 20 knots. So that's enough to make, big waves, right? And, should be white caps at 20 knots. And the wave field should mature as it comes across down the fetch. And then here's the wave field that results from that. And you see the waves are big out here. They're kind of 8 or 9 feet. And then in here, there's this pattern that really matches the ice pattern where there's less waves in there. And you can see that that ice being along the coast, that's protecting the coast to some degree. But then the waves pick up again in here because there's a region where there's a little bit of fetch and the waves can generate again, right? So it's complicated. There's a real interplay here. And we want to be able to take this information, the information about the ice and the winds, and forecast what the waves are going to be and what's going to happen at the coast. So what we're doing on this project is we're developing that model. We've done a bunch of that work. We've been making some outreach trips around the slope villages, and we're here now talking to you. We have put out some moorings ahead of time. We did a trip on a small boat that works out of Prudhoe Bay called the Ukpik in August, and we put out some moorings that measure the waves and measure the temperatures. And now we're here. We're doing more moorings. We're also doing lots of buoys that drift around and they measure the waves and the temperatures as they drift. And then we'll come back next year and we'll recover all these moorings, and hopefully we'll talk to you again and keep telling you what we've learned. The places we'll be working are along the North Slope. And so I'm starting with this map here, which is showing the whaling communities and the subsistence hunting areas. And we've chosen sites to try to deconflict our work with the hunting. I'm well aware that there have been no whales from Utqiagvik yet this year, and that the whales are offshore, and that we are going to have a tougher job deconflicting that this year. We're working on that. Here are the sites we've chosen. Again, straddling between these different communities. We've chosen 3 sites to focus on. We will probably also collect other data of opportunity whenever a storm comes up as we're going through our trip. So here are these 3 sites. They're at Icy Cape, they're at the Jones Islands, and they're at Flaxman Island. And in each case, we have moorings that measure the waves and the temperatures starting close to the shore and going further offshore. Here's what it looks like right now in terms of the ice conditions. This is a product from the National Ice Center, and they've been great partners in providing us specialized products for this. So this is almost a week old now, but it's still pretty much valid. So here we are down in Nome. You can see the red is almost complete ice cover, and then you can see these other colors are where the ice is filling in. So from a scientific perspective, this is sort of an ideal condition for the questions we're asking. There is still this enormous area of open water, a big fetch to make big waves. But there is a little bit of ice starting to form along the north slope, enough that it probably is protecting the coast a little bit. And it's that interplay during this shoulder season that we really want to understand. We want to understand when there's enough space to make big waves, but there's some ice to protect the coast. How do those two things work together? And when is the coast fragile or vulnerable to erosion and to these storms, and when is it not? And can we forecast what that is going to be on a short time scale, a week, something that's useful to a local community making a decision about when to put in boats and what to do? But also, can we forecast that on a decadal scale or even longer time scale to answer questions about what are these coastlines going to look like? Where are these communities going to need to be? So that's the ice right now. Of course, it's going to progress. We're going to spend a lot of time coming along these sides, but then we let it go out here for the work Hauke and Flores and their team, Hauke and Franz and their teams would like to do. And we'll be doing this interplay of in the ice, out of the ice the whole time. And there's a few more details there on the moorings, but I think I'll just leave you with these links. So this is the website for this project. There is a live tracker there, and so you can track the ship throughout the whole project. It updates about every 2 hours, and so you can see where the ship is and what we're doing. We'll post a few updates there. And then we have a team with us that's going to be writing and doing photography and really trying to help us communicate all this science. And so for links and handles for their work. And then you can always just email me. It might take me a day or two to get back to you, but I'm happy to field more questions. Yeah.
So why don't we see if anyone has questions at the end, but because they're so different topics related to the cruise, do you want to field questions now?
Sure, if they're really specific to this stuff, yeah.
So you showed the greatest erosion occurring where there was bluffs, and basically, to me, it seemed to be a place where there was no barrier spits or islands, and so that's kind of the bluffs that were most exposed to the sea were subject to permafrost melt, as well as battering, mechanical erosion, and those barrier spit areas much less so.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And so what we think is happening at those bluff zones is that the waves come in and bring in warm water and they undercut the bluff. And then the bluff eventually collapses because you've taken the bottom out from underneath it and the whole block just falls over. And then once it falls over, it pretty quickly just sort of dissolves almost and washes away. It's remarkable in these time-lapse videos to see that in a day it's gone. It's really remarkable. So I think those are the most vulnerable coastlines. But I think the barrier islands, there's a lot that's moving there. I mean, it's amazing to spend time in a small boat with some of the people who've worked here in some of these zones for years, and to have them driving around and all of a sudden just run up aground and say, oh, that wasn't there before. And there's a shoal that I wasn't, and it's all pretty soft enough gravel. We haven't torn anything wide open yet, but that stuff's moving around a lot too. And I think, there's sort of the questions there are maybe on different time scales, right? The bluffs are going fast and they're going now, but I think these barrier islands are going to be on the move a lot in the next decades. Okay.
And then we can move on. But in February, around February 20th, 2018, we had an event in the Bering Strait where we had really high winds, and the northern Bering Sea was open, and we had what ice there was in February at Diomede just obliterated, but it was obliterated in a way that it was chunked and then thrown at them by these incredibly large swells. And it damaged, they had infrastructure problems with that, they had transportation problems, so forth issues. And no one had ever seen anything quite like that. Is that something that you'll be able to predict, or is that something that we should be expecting more if we get large swells and sea ice in the same? I mean, that was sort of unbelievable to watch the force that ice was doing.
I would say yes. No, predictions are dangerous things to make, but I would say yes, in part because earlier I showed that the period of the waves, that's the time between each wave, is getting longer. And so they're becoming more like a swell wave, the kind of thing you would surf on, this big, long, especially the big swell, large wave surfing. And those are much more powerful. And so the catastrophic failure of an ice pack through wave propagation is more likely in those swell conditions. And then once it fails, boy, the waves can just run amok and have their, have their propagation go all across the whole basin. And so one of the things we're interested in is a potential feedback in which if you break up some ice, now the waves can both propagate freely, but also if you open up some water, they can be generated. They have more fetch, right? So a little bit of fetch, a little bit of waves, break up some ice. And then you have more fetch, you make bigger waves, and you break up more ice. So that could have a runaway effect, right? As you open up more water, you're just making bigger and bigger waves, and you're just chewing up more and more ice. So I should be clear that I think what's happening in the present day is still mostly about temperatures. The water is really warm, and the ice is melting. And then there's feedbacks with the solar heating and et cetera. But I think this wave feedback is another feedback that we haven't really explored. And I think on a per event basis, and events are the catastrophic thing that matters to communities, I think this mechanical wave process is probably going to turn out to be more important. So climate-wise, it's the temperature story. I think event-wise and what happens to infrastructure, it's more of a wave story. They're both important. Yeah, that's not what I'm here for.
And so I guess next we have the ice portion.
Right. Yeah, maybe Hauke can have a question that can be a segue. How's that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, when I hear pancake ice, big swell, the big ocean running on the polar coastline, I think Antarctica.
Yes, you do.
You make comparisons. Maybe you can see in Antarctica already what you can now expect more and more here. Yeah,
it's a great question. So Letty, who's with us on the trip, has done a bunch of work down there that we've helped out with a little bit, and the pancakes tend to be bigger in Antarctica, right? They're more common and they're bigger. And they're bigger because the wavelength of the waves is longer. The Southern Ocean makes these enormous long swells, and so it all scales with the wavelength. And it's much more common to see pancakes. In Antarctica, you see pancakes all the time, right? Oh, the marginal ice zone always has pancakes. It has been very rare to see pancakes, and they haven't been reported much in the Western Arctic. And now we find them to be prevalent. And I think it's this fetch issue. Yeah, so I think that the Arctic environment is mostly a good analogy to where we're headed. However, even if the entire Arctic goes ice-free some future summer, it still won't be as big as the Southern Ocean. So we're never going to quite have swells that long. But we're moving that direction. I mean, we've gone from something that from a wave perspective was a lake, and then a Great Lake, and now a sea, and soon going to be an ocean. Right? I mean, the wave environment's really changing. Surf's up. Okay. Switch. Okay.
Good. So thank you very much. I have to say, it's an honor to be here. I'm really happy. We made a 30 hours journey coming in this morning from Europe with part of our group that comes from Europe. And for all us Europeans who are in here today, it's the first time in Alaska. We've been walking around here and we are still quite overwhelmed by this community and by the light that it has with the beautiful weather today. But if I start speaking more and more slowly, if you don't understand me correctly, just call out and wake me up and we'll get through this. So this talk is presented by Franz and myself, but we are speaking on behalf of quite a big group. We didn't put all the names up here, but they're all sitting back there. If you want to talk afterwards, I think everybody's up for a chat. And we are all quite interested in what's happening under the ice. And with under the ice, I mean under the ice, and we'll soon find out why. Just a little bit about my background. I am now 45 years old, and as a kid, I loved to go skiing in the Austrian Alps. And at one time, I was really fascinated that the Alps were so high you could even ski in summer. I know in Alaska that's maybe not a special thing, but for us it was. So this was in summer 2003. And then if you look up in the warm 2012 year, which is very similar in the Northern Hemisphere, and this year, compared to this year, almost half the glacier was gone, and it's really not that fun anymore to do summer skiing in the Alps. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because in Central Europe, where I live, only the people who go skiing see what's actually happening on this planet. You here in the Arctic region, you know what is meant by the effect of climate change on our environment, because you can feel it very clearly. This is the climate data, the air temperature in Spitsbergen increased from when I was going to primary school until 2017, I think, with an average increase of about 10 degrees centigrade, and I'm sure it's similar here in Nome. However, when I give similar talks at home, people have this in mind. So we see this temperature increase, and I still get questions this year, 2019, in my village from people saying, is it really happening? Do we have something on climate change? Do you believe in it? And I say, I'm not believing in it because it's nothing to believe, it's a fact. And again, I'm sure you know it much better than I do, but just to give you a background, that for the European people, it is a slightly different story. And for you, it's really imminent what is happening with climate change. Why are we interested in the sea ice and in what's happening underneath the sea ice? It's because sea ice is a source of life. And that may not be so familiar to everyone who's not really into biology or things like that. Sea ice can host quite a diverse community of life, and this life is supported by algae that grow inside the sea ice. You have, again, sea ice here all the time, so you've noticed that it's brown from the underside and so on, so I don't have to tell you. These are pictures from Antarctica, but I know it looks similar in the Arctic Ocean. And these ice algae, they produce carbon that can support a food web and can also support a diversity of animal life that we find dwelling underneath the sea ice and taking advantage of those ice algae and of each other. And this is just a picture collection of different animals that we caught at the sea ice underside, both in the Southern Ocean and in the Arctic Ocean. And I hope you share my impression that these are extremely beautiful life forms. It's really fun to study them and to work with them. So yeah, this was supposed to be the last slide and we moved it. It's not the last slide, sorry. So those ice algae here, as I said, they produce carbon, and this carbon is transferred through a food chain going through little bugs that sit at the underside of sea ice and graze ice algae through fish, notably this fish, which in Europe we call polar cod, and you guys call it Arctic cod. And then there are some more steps through seals, for example, that lead all the way up to the top predators of the regions, in this case, the polar bear. And my personal research interest is really about this whole food chain and how climate change affects the food web dynamics in this chain, who are the winners and the losers of the changes that are about to come. And particularly with relevance to this year's expedition, we are interested in polar cod. Polar cod is a small fish that is the staple food of the seals, and in this region, especially of the beluga whales. And in that way, really is a cornerstone of the Arctic food web. So without polar cod, everything else doesn't work anymore. It's not so interesting for fishermen, this fish, but it's really, really interesting for all the rest of the life forms in the Arctic region. And polar cod themselves, they feed again on small crustaceans, notably also particularly those little bugs that sit at the underside of sea ice and graze those ice algae. They are really interesting animals because in the Arctic region, along with the sister species, ice cod, they are the only ones that in the short time compared to the Antarctic environment that they had to evolve to a cold environment, couple of million years, they have developed adaptations. They can survive in freezing conditions. They have special substances in their blood that prevent them from freezing and makes them very strong in a cold environment, but not so competitive when this environment warms up. So we are interested in finding out how the sea ice changes affect the distribution of this ecological keystone species. To study the effect of sea ice on marine biota, you are facing a lot of logistical and scientific problems. And one of the biggest challenges we have is the fact that the sea ice environment is highly dynamic. If you look at the distribution of flat ice, ridged ice, multi-year ice, first-year ice, thick ice, thin ice, there's a high variability in the physical properties of sea ice. It's a high spatial variability, and this spatial variability is constantly changing in time as, for example, the waves are moving everything around and there's ice drift and melting and so on going on. So understanding the heterogeneity of this habitat is really the key to understand how organisms are distributed in this environment. And our approach at the Alfred Wegener Institute is to try to catch all the different scales that we can sample in sea ice and that are relevant to the biological system. So we use ice cores to really look at the microscopic scale of what's going on. We use underwater vehicles to map the underside of sea ice, look at the different conditions in ice algae distribution. And particularly for, again, this year's expedition here, we are using a big under ice trawl that is also equipped with sensors. It's not only catching the animal, but also at the same time mapping the physical and the biogeochemical properties of the sea ice with a set of sensors. This is an animation of our under ice trawl, which is built by Michiel. Where are you? There, over there. It's towed from a vessel. This is Polarstern, our ship at Abi, but now it's Sikuliaq. And it's going to the side of the ship, behind the ship, where it can go under the ice. And you see all these sensors here that look at the temperature, salinity, at the distribution of algae in the water and in the ice. It looks at the light transmission properties of the sea ice and so on. And this suit that typically can sample over distances of 1, 2, 3, 4 kilometers per tow. I'm now showing you a little movie that shows how the suit works under the ice. And it's a best of scenes from the Arctic and the Antarctic. And I hope you will enjoy this. Oh, that's not the next slide, is it? That's a bit confusing with the preview here anyway. So with this net, we were able in 2012 to sample polar cod under the sea ice in the Nansen Basin. So that's the other side of the Arctic Ocean on all these different stations. And from 13 holes that we did, 12 contained polar cod in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, which was quite exciting for myself. And with satellite data and sea ice model backtracking, we were able to look at backtrack the drift of the sea ice to find where those polar cod might have come from, assuming that they were also following the ice drift. And can we get this here? Yeah. And interestingly, you can see that we could kind of trace back the ice flows under which the polar cod were samples to certain regions along the Siberian coast that are also spawning sites of polar cod. So we hypothesized that the sea ice kind of advex polar cod across the Arctic Ocean and can connect the different populations. And this of course has implication when the whole sea ice system is changing and also the drift is getting shorter. So Franz, I think we lost the video. Did you hide it, and that's why it showed up in the preview and not?
No, I thought was it that black
Yeah, but there was no black slide. Here it is. No, that's the one.
Yeah, it's just not showing up.
Yeah. Okay, now comes the video.
With music.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's all from Polarstern. And Michiel and I were here this April in Newport testing how the suit could work from Sikuliaq. And it looks actually like that it will be much easier from Sikuliaq than from Polarstern. We have a little GoPro inside the net so we can see what it's doing first person view. Yeah, that's not your ocean. This is a principal demonstration. And that's in reality.
Okay, is this just being towed up?
Yeah. That's about 1 to 2 knots towing speed, typically.
Yeah. I all of a sudden want one.
Ask Michiel for a quote. Yeah, and well, this is the transition. So we try to see basically if the idea that at the end of summer, the young polar cod, or some of them at least, attach to sea ice and then get advected across the Arctic Ocean, also holds true in the Western Arctic where we are here. And Franz will continue with the talk and tell you more precisely what we are planning to do on this Sikuliaq expedition.
Questions on the ice net?
Under rough ice conditions, do you load the net up with chunks of ice? Is it
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We do that. And particularly now we have to be paying attention because when you are at the beginning of the season, you get super cold water and when it's just starting to freeze. So if you're unlucky, you make a big ice machine. We had that a couple of times in Antarctica.
Any other questions?
So I'm still trying to figure out how it's towed off the side.
Yeah.
So like, so where are your lines that go out?
Yeah. I think the secret is that a normal net would have a bridle that attaches symmetrically on both sides.
Yeah.
the bridle of this net only attaches on one side. And then you've seen that it has these big pieces of pie that are the sides of the frame. They act as a shear boards. So you pull from only one side and then it's kind of moved in that direction. And then it holds steady. And in this way, it kind of creates a sideward movement from the ship.
In the past, we did studies here under the ice at Nome, and they're underwater freshwater springs.
Mm-hmm.
And in the winter, the seawaters could be -2 C. So the fresh water coming up creates a slushy curtain.
Nice.
And our ROVs would get stuck. And it took everything we had to pull them back out of the,
Yeah.
we torpedoed them into the sludge. So that would really.
Well, here we are working at the surface of the ocean, so we would not have to do with
It comes all the way
those
to
kind of. It does come up.
On short fast ice, it's
Yeah.
just like a curtain all the way to the surface.
Okay, but that's near the coast,
Yeah.
so we will be careful about that. Good. Thanks for telling us. Yeah, because the freshwater ice is a whole different thing. It's like concrete, and
This
it's
was, it was mixed, but it was more viscous than the water.
yeah. Must be beautiful though. Hope you got some footage from your ROVs there.
We didn't see it that way.
Franz, you bring it home with a food chain.
All right. Well, I'll just tell you a little bit about how I got interested in and why we're interested in using that here as well. So I had actually met Hauke a while ago and had stopped by in Bremerhaven at one point to talk to him about maybe getting one of those nets for the university here, so we can do similar work off the Sikuliaq. That was when we were just getting the Sikuliaq ready. And so we got one of those nets and got to try it out, like Hauke said, in Newport, just to make sure we can deploy it off the Sikuliaq, and it seems like that's gonna work just fine. And then we got actually some funding through a European Arctic Research Icebreaker Consortium that is set up to facilitate collaborations across Europe and the US, and there's kind of requirements for how many Europeans, and you have to have 3 different countries, and you can go to a different country and use their icebreaker. And so, like Hauke said, we're trying to figure out whether these polar cod, and I will be calling them Arctic cod, because that's what we call them here typically. So in the following slides, you'll just see Arctic cod. How do they associate with the sea ice in the fall? And can we say something about where they are and why they are where they are? And we'll also be looking at zooplankton, their prey items. A good portion of the support for this to bring some of us on board and actually work up some of the data comes from BOEM. And in fact, we have Lorena Enfield from BOEM, who's sitting over there, who's going to join us. And she's got a lot of experience out in the field and in the Arctic, and can also identify fish if we catch anything besides polar cod or Arctic cod. Oops, that's not the forward slide. That wasn't my slide. Whoops. Did I upload the wrong one? I think I did.
You'll take an intermission. You want to do that?
No, if you want, I only have a few slides, but I think it's on the memory stick here. I just pulled the wrong file, I think.
figuring that out. Where did Hauke go?
He's right here. He'll be happy to answer any other questions.
I just wanted to say on your, you're in the Arctic, and you had that slide that went from tiny to the, from your algae and the ice. You said the bear was the top. Up here, you're looking at a lot of top predators for the Arctic ecosystem. So people normally here were very comfortable having people in the picture as predators.
Okay.
We're very, especially in this region, we're very closely aligned with our ecosystem. Always with there.
Okay.
Just as a funny thing.
Yeah, but that's a big difference. I had to get used to it when Franz and I prepared this cruise. On the European side, it's really not, the connection is not close, not that close. The people, the local culture that live there, that we also involve there they're not that Arctic, so they are actually way more south, except for the Spitsbergen people.
Right.
So on.
Well, welcome to the north.
I actually have to go to, I think this is the same file. I'm gonna have to go to my desktop, on my laptop. Yeah, this is the same file that I uploaded earlier. So bear, whoops. I don't need that one actually.
You need a break?
Sure, if you have more questions for Hauke or Jim for that matter.
So while we're waiting, the next Strait science, once Franz gets this figured out, it's good stuff, is on Thursday, we have Lyle Britt coming from Nome Fisheries, and he's going to give us the results of the 2019 bottom trawl survey that went from Dutch Harbor to Diamond. So be sure to come for that. I know a lot of you seem to be from the ship, so we'll be missing you, but there will be a lot of interest locally here. We've had some big changes in our world with the fish and the animals and all kinds of things. So Lyle will bring it home to what's going on in the Bering Sea. We're all, of course, curious as well as he is, I'm sure, as what's happening in the Chukchi Sea.
Just thought I'd point out that this is the month when we get our worst marine disasters here in Nome. The one that sticks in my mind the hardest is 1974 storm, when we had two big lows, cyclonic lows strike in quick succession here, and then that created a storm surge of 3.5 meters, and there was 0.5 meter of short fast ice, and so they lifted the ice and put it level with the street, and it broke all the windows on the seaward side of Nome, and broke many walls and buildings down. And that's happened in November at least 4 times in the last 100 years. And it can be catastrophic. And that's not been possible in the Ocean until recently because of the extensive sea ice up there. They had occasional, what we call EBOs, where ice overran the beach and pancake, but it wasn't the battering ram kind of action that we saw in the 1974 storm. And that storm was, the destruction from that storm was compounded because of the ice repeatedly slamming into structures where, when the storm doesn't have that kind of ice in it, then it's still harmful, but it's not really so destructive. And I think that's one big impact that northern Alaska hasn't anticipated well in my opinion. I think that's I likely would.
Getting there.
Jim, I have a question. Is the oil industry at Prudhoe Bay, I've seen these waves and stuff like that, are they going to take any action to protect stuff up there, or do they need to? What's the situation up there?
Yeah. I mean, you know, a lot of their more fragile infrastructure inside the lagoon, so, you know, fairgrounds, don't get too worried about it. And then the offshore stuff, the man-made islands that they put out there, those are overbuilt, fair market. So I think they're probably okay for a while. I don't think they still do it. I mean, they just have a lot more resources, but there are other problems. So if you look at any section of coastline, the best protected part is where there's a well, right? And the communities are
Vulnerable.
very vulnerable by comparison. Right? They just don't have the money to throw that. So, and they probably, if you look at what the wells are, how their seawalls are built, or what number of commitments they have, whatnot. I mean, it's been designed by a licensed coastal engineer, and they're done properly to a spec way by, you know, what the communities have is probably not that. It's money.
All right.
Okay.
Yep, home stretch. So anyway, we got the net. We're here now, and there's, like I said, a number of Europeans involved. When we first kind of conceived of that, you know, we just sort of sketched out what we thought we could try to do, and you know, we never know where the ice is going to be. This is just an example from late October in 2017, and we were going to do, you know, our hope was to go in from the open water into heavier ice, but that depends a lot on what we can do. Was the Sikuliaq as part of our, and I'll just continue on. So there's a list of people from Europe, and a couple UAF people. Alexei Pinchuk is here as well, who's a zooplankton ecologist. What we, you know, kind of wanted to do, you know, one of the primary reasons for me to try to do this cruise now is to kind of get the Sikuliaq actually set up to do this kind of work, to basically allow us to obtain some of these under ice biological samples if we haven't really been able to do to that extent. It's logistically always very difficult to, you know, get these kinds of samples, obviously. And then specifically for the science question, we just wanted to see if these particularly young Arctic cod associate with the newly formed ice as it starts forming in the Chukchi and Beaufort Sea during the falls. And then we have a series of more sort of scientific objectives to, you know, look at where and when conditions are right, if there's prey available for them in the fall. We really don't know much of anything at this time of year. We'll also be looking at scattering layers in the water column. We'll have acoustics on the boat to look for scattering layers that we can then target with a midwater trawl to see if there's our krill or euphausids or young Arctic cod in those layers. We'd also want to look at what condition they at that time of year. The condition really depends a lot on temperature and prey availability. And sometimes when they go into winter, they have low energy content and they can't make it through the winter. Other times they may have very high energy content and they can, and we simply don't know anything about Arctic cod in that regard. I wanted to back up a little bit though. I've come here a few times to talk more about the commercial species that are moving north, like Pacific cod and walleye pollock, and I understand you have the Lyle Britt coming up again in a couple of days to talk about what they found in 2019 about that. But I think, you know, kind of want to look at it from the Arctic perspective, and one of the losers may be Arctic cod. It may well be kind of a bellwether for changes to come in the Chukchi Sea as well. And so this is actually based on the bottom trawl survey data for the only 3 years so far, now also including 2019, where we had survey data throughout that region from the southeast all the way to Bering Strait. And this really just focus on the blue dots. That's, you know, we can classify that into different types of communities, different groups of species. And there's one that we can identify as an Arctic community, and a big player in that community is Arctic cod. Includes a bunch of other species like Bering flounder, sole, sculpins, eelpouts, and snailfish and so forth. And you can just see that, so it's not only Arctic cod disappearing, but that entire community basically shrinking. So kind of the boundary, if you will, between a more southern community, a subarctic community, and the Arctic community is just going north. It's kind of like the boreal forest moving north into the tundra, you know, kind of the marine equivalent of that in a sense. And we've come to term that borealization, and that's well known. Also happens in the Barents Sea on the European side. It happened there a little earlier actually, and has sort of stopped now. Extending that a little bit to the north, what we know about Arctic cod in the Chukchi Sea until a few years ago was pretty limited, but we've had a number of surveys, starting with the Arctic ice surveys in 2012, 2013, and then in 2017 again, and then some sail drone surveys in 18 and 19 using acoustics. So you get these images that basically tell you how much backscatter there is in the water, and to figure out what that backscatter is due to, what the sound bounces off of, essentially. You can tow a net through that, and in one of these tows that they did this year, and I don't know if Jared showed this picture. Jared did a talk here earlier after that cruise, but one of the tows through one of those layers was totally dominated by Arctic cod. So in general, in the northern Chukchi Sea, they are totally dominated by Arctic cod. So we can kind of verify that way what's in those layers and quantify what's there. And then if you map that out along the entire transect, you can map the strengths of the backscatter. And in this case, most of that north of about Point Hope at least, or Cape Lisburn, is due to Arctic cod. So almost all of the stronger signals here in red, yellowish and red, that's Arctic cod. So we've known since 2012, 2013 that there are these concentrations of young Arctic cod. And notice in 2017, that was a big year for Arctic cod. There was an order of magnitude more than in the other years. This is the total backscatter, sort of a measure of how many there were in total. From 2012, 2013, 17, and 18, and 2017 really stands out there. And 2017 was kind of unique in that there was more kind of northward flow into the Chukchi Sea. It was a really warm year too. But it really stands out in this time series, and we don't fully understand why there were so many. This is a pretty intensive operation, and so NOAA has, since 2018, they've actually used these sail drones to run the acoustic transect. So they mounted the acoustic transducer on a sail drone and run these same transects basically. So this location here has been fairly consistent, and then in 2019 there was also fairly high backscatter up here, and of course, you know, we're going to get into that area some more, and we really don't know where these young fish go. So these are mostly really pretty small fish, like you know, a couple inches long at most, or shorter. And where they go after this, we don't really understand yet, and that's part of the reason why we, you know, like to see if they maybe associate with the ice as it forms. I mean, they're probably going to drift around the corner into the Beaufort Sea, or to the west in the Chukchi Sea. And what we're interested in is if they are deeper in the water column, and if so, do they come up under the ice as the ice forms? So we kind of put together a bit of a conceptual model of what we think may be happening, starting with the spawning. And what we know about spawning is, you know, somewhat limited. And I have talked to a few people around here, but not really very many. There's no, you know, I don't know of much evidence of spawning of the Arctic cod around here on the US side. There's more evidence on the Russian side, but they do generally spawn in like late fall, early winter, starting perhaps in November, December, January, in some regions under the ice. The eggs themselves are really buoyant. They rise right up. They go right under the ice. They can freeze actually, and they just fine. Then they develop over a long time in those cold temperatures. That takes a while. And then eventually when the ice melts out, they may develop quicker, especially if there's also maybe freshwater sources that add a little bit of warmer temperatures. They can develop a lot quicker. And then when they hatch, the larvae will mostly be in open water and depend on the food that's available. But where that happens here in this region, we really don't know. We know there's these really high concentrations of Arctic cod in the northern Chukchi Sea. What I showed earlier is very, very high concentrations. We just don't know where they're coming from. So we've run similar to what Hauke showed earlier. We ran some models, but in this case, we just release particles at some locations where we think they might be hatching. And we started them with a whole bunch of locations and kind of narrowed it down to potentially these spawning areas. And there is some anecdotal information for spawning on the western side here and also off the Chukotka Peninsula there, above Anadir, around St. Lawrence. I haven't actually talked to people if they've ever witnessed spawning there, but we certainly, various crews have picked up the very young larvae around that area. So that's one of the potential spawning locations. And then sort of conceptually, and that has been, we kind of validated or looked at that was a computer model, but you can the currents in that area are generally to the north. So these eggs and larvae will drift with the currents as the ice kind of retreats. This is a typical June snapshot of ice conditions. And eventually, as the ice retreats further into that area where we see them. So by September is when we've been out there sampling. And so this is kind of a nursery area for these young Arctic cod. However, like I said, where they go after that, we really don't know. And that's kind of part of the reason why we're here now. And there's other work going on, continuing to go on in terms of the modeling. But whatever we can collect on this cruise will be really helpful in kind of filling in the puzzle to fill in the remainder of their life history. And I think this is all I had. That's what we're setting out to go see if we can find them at this time of year. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or for any of the others, I assume too, if you have any questions.
Are you in contact with the Eskimo Whaling Commission?
Yeah, so the Sikuliaq has a sort of a kind of a outreach community operating procedures, I guess, on working with the communities. And Jim's the chief scientist on this cruise, and he's been kind of our liaison. And you went to the meeting last week, couple weeks ago, right? Called in, yeah, right, to the meeting, yeah. So we do talk to them.
Which I see as twofold. I mean, hopefully they're interested in the research and it's help. But also we're trying to deconflict and just make sure we're not in areas that they're fishing, that they're hunting out of the way. Are you contacting them daily? Because it is, as much as you might have an interest in research, but you certainly have an interest in putting food on the table. So as you get further north, and I saw one of your places there off the Sikuliaq, you do whatever you want, but work with them very closely to make sure this is okay. Maybe not okay, but your relationship's going to be very vital.
We certainly don't want them surprised that we were there. So my last contact with them was about 36 hours ago. Do it every few days, but if you think even more frequent,
as you get further north, more frequent, because we had a meeting here last week, not from hunters from up north, and they're still talking about having their boats ready, and this is their life, our life. So I would I will figure out, making sure I'm talking to captains, not just me just offering suggestions.
No, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I would be talking to captains and also the chairman of the EWC, Raul, or I believe his name. So, yeah, this is the time to start laying down markers of where you're at, what's going on. And they probably will tell you what they're doing.
I think you bring up a good point, Roy, and that is for everybody who doesn't live in this area, or this may be your first time going north, because of the incredible conditions we're experiencing, there is much heightened food security throughout the region. And what I think Roy is referring to is the fact that normally the highest harvest of the bowhead whale, which has great nutritional, cultural, and economic value in the North Slope and in this region as well. We have whalers here as well. We're seeing things that we've never seen before. One, the unprecedented open water, but the whales have, pretty much as a group, as a population, have voted with their flippers to swim a different way. So know that if you're new to this region, I know a lot of people are off the ship right now for this, but it is it's a big concern. And it's not just the whales, there's other concerns too. So I think you are probably in touch, would be my guess, if you're following the Sikuliaq's protocols. My guess is you may not be aware, but I'm sure the ship is, since the captain would be following those. It's probably every day.
Yeah, as I understand it, the Sikuliaq makes daily contact was, I don't know, was in what range, but certainly was the communities that were anywhere close to it.
But it's like it's a secondary thing I've been doing to give them a little bit longer lead time. Right. Those calls more are, we're here tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think a little bit longer time horizon is helpful.
Yeah, I think both is
then
important.
We can adjust our plans too.
And it's not just the whale, down here, we're all worried about food.
Yeah.
So thanks for bringing that up.
So I spend a lot of time doing aerial surveys on fish, and when especially in the spring when the ice is melting, there's kind of a freshwater lens about each iceberg, and collectively they create a front on relatively warm saline water. There's this relatively cold fresh front moving along, and predatory fish, herring and capelin, will stack up on that front. There must be a reason. There's probably prey, i.e. the polar cod could be part of that mix. The fish are working that edge. And so with this new trawl, it would be real interesting to even have a salinity or temperature sensors high and low in the trawl on that frame to see if there's any differences, and that might inform you about
like the fine scale vertical structure.
Yeah, well, it's in the springtime in Norton Sound, it's a 5 or 6 degree jump in 20 feet. I mean, it's no distance at all. You can see it looking at the water. There's a line in the water where it's cold and warm.
Well, we certainly have a CTD on the suit for the horizontal gradient. We do not have like horizontally spaced CTDs. I actually did talk to some folks at OSU about that were kind of interested in that, but it's a number of expensive sensors that we didn't get for this. And I don't know if you guys ever done that, like have had multiple instruments on the.
No, but we do have always, because the trawls are relatively long, we have a depth gradient integrated after that, because the suit is normally at the surface, but it goes with the waves, and when there's ice, it goes a lot deeper. So when you just plot them vertically, like the oceanographers do, you get it also a vertical profile. It's an integrated one. It's not on a horizontal resolution anymore, but you can see, you'll be able to see these patterns.
we would see ice, and then the ice would melt and become that, you know, a more viscous, fresh look to it, and then suddenly there'd be choppy water that was salt and warm, and it might, but there was a line, and as you approach the ice, you go out of choppy water into that viscous, cold, fresh water, and it would be bang, and the fish would be stacked all on that line. When they flew surveys, you could see the fish lined up on that line, and when you were in the water, you could smell the fish, and then you couldn't as you pass that line. And we're talking just a demarcation in the water. And I suspect you're going to go up north, and the ice front's coming south, and but when I look at the temperature maps here in the last day, you know, it's 3-4 degrees Celsius north of Sikuliaq, and then to the east it's -1. There's a big gradient.
Yeah.
When do you think all these reports are going to be available? How long will it take them to get ready?
So we'll probably, I mean, we have reports due to the funders and so forth within a year, probably. But there's going to be preliminary reports with sort of first impressions and data that we can immediately go home with. But there's a lot of lab work afterwards too, that will probably, you know, take a year or a couple of years in some cases. These biological samples often take a long time to work up, depending on what else people have to do.
Will you make sure we get a copy here so people have it?
Yeah, so I'm in the same unit as Ye, so we're not always in good communication, but usually we coordinate things, and I will.
What was highly
Yeah, but yeah, we will definitely make an effort. That was part of the proposal to try to make sure that we, you know, bring the results back to the areas around here. And Jim has a fairly extensive outreach effort too for afterwards, right, to go to the different communities. You know, I don't know if you do written, you know, like Lyle did or others have done sort of a 2-pager that sometimes Gay helps with or somebody else help with to translate scientific speak into.
Try to, so, you know, we do a cruise report at the end, we try to dump something into 1 or 2 page plain language,
Yeah.
You know, synopsis of it. Well, that's even helpful for the scientists.
It is.
Right?
It turns out.
Absolutely.
Turns out people don't like reading 50-page
It turns out that when Wildbrick came up and brought the memorandum, the technical NOAA memorandum, and we sat down and everybody was complaining, can you change that? And he said, you know, honestly, we don't do this. So when they were giving them out to us, it's like we were going to. So they've redone their whole reporting for what people in this region wanted, and now they're selling like dog. I mean, they give them away. It's the researchers who want something easy to do. It's, you know,
Yeah.
that's quick and gives you the answers. That's what people wanted here. That's what they got, and they're very popular. So I can show you what. But I have a question for fish. I have a food chain question. Anyone else? Our polar cod, which fed our seabirds and fed our seals, our young seals especially, and our lots of whales and things like that, of which we had many, have gone down according to the Wildbrick 2018. We don't know what's happening in 2018, but we will Thursday. But we've gone down something like 100%, 98% of our biomass of Arctic cod in the Northern Bering Sea. Do you think, because I was watching you think, do you think they emigrated out of here following the ice retreat, or do you think they've been consumed? Is anyone looking at that?
Yes, we tried. It's really hard to do.
Okay, right.
So we tried. I had a student who actually looked at that in a little more detail. So what you can do is, so one question is, are they just limited by temperature? Arctic cod are a cold-loving species, and so maybe if it warms up, they'll just go away. They'll just disappear. But we know, I mean, they'll swim long distances. They certainly can. They have to migrate to come back south to spawn. They probably have to cover hundreds of kilometers. But if it's really a temperature dependent thing, then you would expect them to not occur in really warm temperatures, but we actually see them in really warm temperatures, but only when there's no predators around, like when there's no big cod and no pollock around. So I think, yeah, so we can show that fairly convincingly, specifically in the northern Bering Sea, because that's the only area where the predators haven't been around all the time. So you can see when you compare areas that have the predators, then the Arctic cod only occur at temperatures that the predators don't like. So really cold temperatures. So it's really, I think the predators are driving that more than the temperature itself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's big for me. Thank you.
And that, I think that makes that signal so much cleaner. I mean, you see that my student, Jen Marshy, looked at other regions as well, and you always see this clear relationship between the Arctic cod advancing and retreating with temperature, essentially. But I think it's a combination of them liking colder temperatures and the predators moving in and basically preying on them.
Again, cheering me up this lecture.
But you get pollock. You know, pollock is good food too. Not as fatty as Arctic cod, though. Arctic cod are really high in lipids, which is they make good food for other things.
So we should probably let these nice people.
Yes.
I don't know, but has anyone got any other questions before we let you go? And we want to thank Storm, Jim, Ice, Hauke, who probably needs to go to bed, and Franz.
Fishy Franz.
Fishy Franz. So thank you very much.